Thank you, John. Congresswoman Bachmann, let's turn to a serious subject. New Hampshire is one of 5 states where individuals who happen to be gay can marry legally. This is a question of conflicting interests. I know you're opposed to same-sex marriage. As president, would you try to overturn, what influence would you use from the White House to try to overturn these state laws, despite your own personal belief that states should handle their own affairs whenever possible and in many circumstances?
Well, I do believe in the 10th Amendment, and I do believe in self-determination for the states. I also believe that marriage is between a man and a woman. I carried that legislation when I was a senator in Minnesota, and I believe that for children, the best possible way to raise children is to have a mother and father in their life. Now, I didn't come from a perfect background. My parents were divorced, and I was raised by a single mother. There's a lot of single families and families with troubled situations. That's why my husband and I have broken hearts for at-risk kids, and it's why we took 23 foster children into our home.
What would President Obama do to initiate and facilitate a repeal law on the state level? Anything at all from the White House? Would you come into the state of New Hampshire, for instance, and campaign on behalf of a repeal law?
I'm running for the presidency of the United States, and I don't see that it's the role of a president to go into states and interfere with their state laws.
All right. Well, let's on that point, to voters out there for whom this is an important issue, let's try to quickly go through it. Let me start at this end. We'll just go right through. I'll describe it this way. Are you a George W. Bush Republican, meaning a constitutional amendment to ban same-sex marriage, or a Dick Cheney Republican, who, like I believe the Congresswoman just said, says this should be made, this decision, same-sex marriage, should be a state's decision?
State's decision.
John, I support a constitutional amendment to define marriage as between a man and a woman. I was the co-author of the state law in Minnesota to define it, but now we have courts jumping over that.
The federal government shouldn't be involved. I wouldn't support an amendment, but let me suggest one of the ways to solve this ongoing debate about marriage, look up the dictionary. We know what marriage is all about, but then get the government out of it. Why doesn't it go to the church, and why doesn't it go to the individuals? I don't think government should give us a license to get married. It should be in the church.
Governor Romney, constitutional amendment or a state decision?
Constitutional.
Mr. Speaker?
Well, I helped author the Defense of Marriage Act, which the Obama administration should be, frankly, protecting in court. I think if that fails, at that point you have no choice except to go to a constitutional amendment.
We heard the Congresswoman's answer, Senator.
Constitutional amendment. Look, the constitutional amendment includes the states. 3/4 of the states have to ratify it, so the states will be involved in this process. We should have one law in the country with respect to marriage. There needs to be consistency on something as foundational as what marriage is.
Very quickly.
John, I do support a constitutional amendment on marriage between a man and a woman, but I would not be going into the states to overturn their state law.
All right, let me ask you another question. The Obama administration is in the process, and Leon Panetta, as the new defense secretary, will implement essentially the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So gays will be allowed to serve openly in the military. I want to ask each of you, and again, if we can be quickly, because then we want to get to the voters' questions. If you become president of the United States, now gays are allowed to serve openly in the military. Would you leave that policy in place, or would you try to change it? Go back to Don't Ask, Don't Tell, or something else?
If I'd had my druthers, I never would have overturned Don't Ask, Don't Tell in the first place. Now that they have changed it, I wouldn't create a distraction trying to turn it over as president. Our men and women have too many other things to be concerned about rather than have to deal with that as a distraction.
Leave it in place if you inherit the new Obama administration policy, or try to overturn it?
John, we're a nation at 2 wars. I think we need to pay deference to our military commanders, particularly our combatant commanders. And in this case, I would take my cues from them as to how this affects the military going forward. I know they expressed concerns, many of the combatant commanders did, when this was originally repealed by the Obama administration.
I would not work to overthrow it, but we have to remember rights don't come in groups. We shouldn't have gay rights. Rights come as individuals. If we wouldn't have this major debate going on, it would be behavior that would count, not the person who belongs to which group.
Leave it in place, what you inherit from the Obama administration, or overturn it?
Well, one, we ought to be talking about the economy and jobs. But given the fact you're insistent, the answer is I believe that Don't Ask, Don't Tell should have been kept in place until conflict was over.
Mr. Speaker?
Well, I think it's very powerful that both the Army and the Marines overwhelmingly opposed changing it, that their recommendation was against changing it. And if, as president, I've met with them and they said, you know, it isn't working, it is dangerous, it's disrupting unit morale, and we should go back, I would listen to the commanders whose lives are at risk about the young men and women that they are, in fact, trying to protect.
Congresswoman?
I would keep the don't ask, don't tell policy.
So you would, whatever the Obama administration does now, you would try to go back. You'd try to reverse what they're doing.
I would, after,
right.
again,
okay.
following
right.
much what the Speaker just said. I would want to confer with our commanders-in-chief and also with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, because I'd want to know how it was being implemented and if it had the detrimental effects that have been suggested that will come.
Last word on this issue, Senator.
The job of the United States military is to protect and defend the people of this country. It is not for social experimentation. It should be repealed, and the commanders should have a system of discipline in place, as Ron Paul said, right. that punishes bad behavior.
Okay, guys, first of all, it's an embarrassing attendance.
Come on out, guys. You think they're coming back? Is it coming up with their game plan back there? You know, we have our game plan.
Yeah, maybe they're conferring with each other.
Yeah, come on out. We're gonna begin. We're just gonna shout out the names. With Ohio Governor, you may be familiar with him.
In the papers tomorrow, all the candidates standing together. We'll see who's talking to each other, who's not talking to each other.
Well, that's awkward.
Well, awkward. That was the whole point.
Don't stage the news. If they're not feeling it, I'm like, you guys nervous? We're a little nervous too. Nah, that'll be fine.
That sounded like the buzzer.
We saved them from that buzzer.
That's right.
We'll explain that.
We'll talk about the buzzer in just a minute. There was controversy. It's good to see you, gentlemen. Welcome. And what do you think of this crowd?
And then we'll get started with our questions.
You know, it's so interesting, and I guess they all know this. They've been talking about each other a lot during the previous 6 months or so. Now they're going to get an opportunity to talk to each other. And obviously this is all part of the process of the American people here in this hall and across the nation trying to sort out who should be the Republican nominee for president in 2016. So this is part of the great American process.
All right, gentlemen. Thank you. Please go to your podiums. That was awkward enough. Let's get you.
Goodness. Get out of here.
And them. Only one tonight. The only one. Is there anyone on stage, and can I see hands, who is unwilling tonight to pledge your support to the eventual nominee of the Republican Party and pledge to not run an independent campaign against that person? Again, we're looking for you to raise your hand now. Raise your hand now if you won't make that pledge tonight. Mr. Trump. So, Mr. Trump, to be clear,
one of the things people love about you is you speak your mind and you don't use a politician's filter. However, that is not without its downsides, in particular when it comes to women. You've called women you don't like fat pigs, dogs, slobs, and disgusting animals. Your Twitter account...
Only Rosie O'Donnell. Thank you.
For the record, it was well beyond Rosie O'Donnell.
Yes, I'm sure it was.
Your Twitter account has several disparaging comments about women's looks. You once told a contestant on Celebrity Apprentice it would be a pretty picture to see her on her knees. Does that sound to you like the temperament of a man we should elect as president? And how will you answer the charge from Hillary Clinton, who is likely to be the Democratic nominee, that you are part of the war on women?
I think the big problem this country has is being politically correct. I've been
Okay, guys, I'm not going to talk too much.
challenged by so many people,
Well,
and I don't frankly have time for total political correctness. And to be honest with you, this country doesn't have time either. This country is in big trouble. We don't win anymore. We lose to China. We lose to Mexico, both in trade and at the border. We lose to everybody. And frankly, what I say, and oftentimes it's fun, it's kidding, we have a good time, what I say is what I say. And honestly, Megan, if you don't like it, I'm sorry. I've been very nice to you, although I could probably maybe not be based on the way you have treated me, but I wouldn't do that. But you know what? We
talk to him directly and say how you respond to that, and you have repeatedly said that you have evidence that the Mexican government is doing this, but that you have evidence you have refused or declined to share. Why not use this first Republican presidential debate to share your proof with the American people.
So, if it weren't for me, you wouldn't even be talking about illegal immigration. Many killings, murders, we need to build a wall.
What evidence do you have, specific evidence, that the Mexican government is sending criminals across the border? 30 seconds.
Border Patrol, I was at the border last week. Border Patrol, people that I deal with, that I talk to, they say this is what's happening because our leaders are stupid. Our politicians are stupid. Leaders of the United States will do it for them, and that's what's happening whether you like it or not.
When you say that the American government is stupid, that the Mexican government is sending criminals, that we're being bamboozled, is that an adequate response to the question of illegal immigration? Illegals coming over are criminals?
Well, let me set the record straight on a couple of things. The first is the evidence is now clear that the majority of people coming across the border are not from Mexico. They're coming from Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras. Those countries are the source of the people that are now coming in its majority. I also believe we need a fence. The problem is if El Chapo builds a tunnel under the fence, we have to be able to deal with that too. And that's why you need an E-Verify system, and you need an entry-exit tracking system, and all sorts of other things to prevent illegal immigration. But I agree with what Governor Kasich just said. People are frustrated. This is the most generous country in the world when it comes to immigration. There are 1 million people a year who legally immigrate to the United States. And people feel like we're being taken advantage of. We feel like despite our generosity, we are being taken advantage of. And let me tell you who never gets talked about in these debates. The people that call my office, who have been waiting for 15 years to come to the United States. And they paid their fees, and they hired a lawyer, and they can't get in. And they're wondering maybe they should come illegally. And so these are important issues, and we should address it. It's a serious problem that needs to be addressed. And otherwise, we're going to keep talking about this for the next 30 years like we have for the last 30 years.
Governor Walker, from 2002 till as recently as 2013, just 2 years ago, you supported comprehensive immigration reform, including a path to citizenship.
Topics now and talk a bit about terror and national security. Governor Christie, you've said that Senator Paul's opposition to the NSA's collection of phone records has made the United States weaker and more vulnerable, even going so far as to say that he should be called before Congress to answer for it if we should be hit by another terrorist attack. Do you really believe you can assign blame to Senator Paul just for opposing the bulk collection of people's phone records in the event of a terrorist attack?
Yes, and applications under the Patriot Act, who have gone before the federal, the Foreign Intelligence Service Court, who has prosecuted and investigated and jailed terrorists in this country after September 11th. I was appointed U.S. Attorney by President Bush.
May I respond?
Go ahead, sir.
I want to collect more records from terrorists, but less records from innocent Americans. For the Bill of Rights.
And Megan, that's a completely ridiculous answer. I want to collect more records from terrorists, but less records from other people. How are you supposed to know, Megan?
Use the Fourth
What are you supposed to? How are you supposed
Use
to?
the Fourth
No, I'll tell you how you
Get a warrant.
Let me tell you something.
Get a judge to sign
when
a warrant.
Senator.
Wait, Governor Christie, make your point.
Listen, Senator, when you're sitting in a subcommittee just blowing hot air about this, you can say things like that. When you're responsible for protecting the lives of the American people, then what you need to do is to make sure that you use the system the way it's supposed to work.
Here's the problem, Governor. You fundamentally misunderstand the Bill of Rights. Every time you did a case, you got a warrant from a judge. I'm talking about searches without warrants, indiscriminately of all Americans' records, and that's what I fought to end. I don't trust President Obama with our records. I know you gave him a big hug, and if you want to give him a big hug again, go right ahead.
Are the hugs that I gave to the families who lost their people on September 11th. Those are the hugs I remember. Like what you're doing
for a decade. See, I think you're on the wrong side of this if you're still arguing for a single payer. I don't think you heard me. You're having a hard time tonight.
Mr. Trump, in 1999, you said you were, quote, very pro-choice, even supporting partial birth abortion. You favored an assault weapons ban as well. In 2004, you said in most cases you identified as a Democrat. Even in this campaign, your critics say you often sound more like a Democrat than a Republican, calling several of your opponents on this stage things like clowns and puppets. When did you actually become a Republican? How did
Megan, the court has ruled, and I said we'll accept it. And guess what? I just went to a wedding of a friend of mine who happens to be gay.